The tide moves like a hand smoothing the wrinkles from the sea. Thin light skims the water and turns each ripple to cold metal. Gulls hang in the air without trying. A man stands at the end of a gray dock with his shoulders slightly forward, as if the morning itself has weight. He is still. He is listening. A black triangle cleaves the surface far out and is gone as quickly as it appeared. He does not wave. He does not shout. He only holds his breath and counts to 5 like a ritual he forgot he knew. 15 years is a long time. Long enough for a coastline to change shape. Long enough for a scar to fade and then return in different weather. Long enough for an orca to grow from a stranded juvenile into a matriarch with a map in her head. Long enough for a human to learn the cost of being remembered by the wild. Keep watching. Because this is the story of an orca who came back to the only person she could trust, and the price both of them paid to make sure a town finally listened. If true animal mysteries and real human consequences are your thing, subscribe now and stay with me. What happens after the first recognition will change how you look at water. The year was 2008 and the town's paint looked tired. Rain had worked its slow job on cedar, nailheads, pride. The inlet below the bluff collected logs in winter like a habit. On the bad nights, the bar broke in white chunks, and the harbor sounded like a memory trying to claw its way back into the present. The call came just before dawn. Juvenile orca, stranded on the sandbar at Breakers Inlet, breathing, not moving. Incoming tide 4 hours out. Storm surge retreating. No time for a plan. Only the plan people build into their bones when they live by water. Jonah Ridge rolled out of bed and into waders that still held last week's salt. He was 27, all tendon and resolve, with hands that could fix most things and a silence that could not. He worked with the Cascadia Marine Rescue Unit when the phone asked him to. Not a uniform, not a badge. A promise to show up and not make things worse. They reached the bar on a skiff that knew how to ride the hinge between wave and flat. The orca lay on her side. Black and white against brown, vast and wrong. The incoming light made her skin the color of wet stone. Each exhale lifted sand into a small storm. The inhale was work. The team did what the manual says and what the sea requires. Shade cloth over the back to keep the wind from burning. Tarps under the flank so the first lift would not peel skin. Buckets of seawater in a rhythm that replaced panic with repetition. Check the eye. Check the blowhole. Check that no one is standing on the wrong piece of tail. Do not talk about hope. Do not talk about fear. Only talk in motions and measurements. Jonah took the place by the head. He knelt in the slurry where sand tried to turn into river. He watched for breath the way a new parent watches for everything. He did not touch her eye patch. He did not touch anything he did not need to. He counted. He timed. He worked until his hands could not feel the cold, and then worked more. The tide turned its face toward them like a slow nod. When the water reached the flukes, the world changed shape. The weight that had been all gravity became partly buoyancy. The body that had felt like a trapped door began to think about being a door that could open. They rolled with the swell, an inch at a time, never letting the spine twist, never letting the head fall. The sea took more weight. The straps loosened. The tarps slid like surrender. She hovered. She did not run. She hung in the first shallow where being alive is a hypothesis and then a fact. Her eye rotated toward him once. It held for a fraction, stretched by adrenaline into a permanent file. He would carry that look inside himself even when he tried not to. Then she slipped deeper, drew a slow breath that sounded like a promise kept, and vanished under jade water that swallowed proof like it always does. They wrote the report after coffee. Female, juvenile, approximately 5 meters. Minor lacerations on the dorsal from cloth pressure. Time of re-entry 10:42 a.m. Outcome, favorable. The county file kept the words. The ocean kept the rest. 15 winters layered themselves on the town like paint applied over weather and belief. Jonah stayed. He fixed hulls and shafts. He learned to read the pitch of diesel engines as if they were voices. He learned which nails to leave in old wood because pulling them would break the board and humility costs less than replacement lumber. He married and then did not stay married. The house got quieter. The shop got louder by comparison. He walked the bluff some nights when the water looked like hammered silver and the pods ran close. Transients mostly. Hunters with a preference for seals and a patience that made fishermen honest or careful. The big male with the blade of a fin. the female with a notch that looked like a comma. Somewhere in the smear of black and white, he wanted to believe the juvenile had become a mother. The town changed in small ways that only matter when you add them together. A cafe opened that sold muffins the size of fists and coffee that tried to taste like the city. A set of rental kayaks appeared at the ramp every June like goslings. The pier got a coat of paint the color of money people did not have. New signs said, no diving, no drones, no touching wildlife. The old rules had always been there. The signs admitted how often they were ignored. Most days he stopped thinking about the eye. Then something, a sigh of a wave under a dock, a smell of kelp rot under warming sun, would cut through and bring it back. The past behaves like fog. It arrives without walking in and leaves without apology. One October, the sea calmed after 7 days of wind, as if someone had made a decision. The radio cracked in a voice that tried not to sound alarmed. Large female orca rolling at the surface near the West Channel. Possible entanglement. No vessel strike observed. Coordinates followed. They slept on the air. Jonah did not think about whether to go. He was down the ramp and into the boat with Officer Lane before the second repeats of the coordinates. She was newer to this work, all edges and clean checklists. He was older to this work, all practice and caution. They made a good pair on days when the ocean was in the mood to forgive mistakes. It rarely was. The Orca floated near the kelp beds where the water looks shallow when it is not. The dorsal was tall now, curved slightly at the tip as if time had put its thumb there. Rope crossed the base of the pectoral and cut into skin that looked both thick and fragile. She turned with effort like someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. They set anchors to keep the bow where the work would be safest. They slid into the cold, knowing that cold lies in the first minute, and then tells the truth. Jonah worked under the rope with a hook and a blade the length of a hand. He avoided touch. He kept his body quiet. He felt the old rhythm return down to the beat count between breath and lift. The first cut freed nothing but tension. The second eased a bite that had held too long. The third found the knot hiding under a layer of algae and oil. When it parted, the line relaxed like a bad thought leaving a room. She rolled 1/4 turn to show the length of the scar that cut behind the dorsal like a signature made years ago. It was the line the tarp had left when it pressed. He traced it in air and felt his chest compress. They backed away without speech. The orca rose to breathe and then stayed there, just below the surface, the eye even with the world. It looked at the boat with that old black depth that takes light and gives back a kind of weight. The boat rocked in the geometry of displacement. The air tasted like steel and kelp. Then she sank fast enough to make everything feel light. The wake that followed was the measurement of a decision you are not invited to understand. People filmed from the cliff. Phones held small frames against a large act. The clip made it online with music it did not need. The title wrote itself because the internet writes it the same way every time. Orca recognizes rescuer after 15 years. Jonah did not press play. He did not need to watch a circle he could feel without proof. 3 days later, the sea put a body in the arch of the inlet. Juvenile male. Smaller dorsal. Rope marks like rings in the soft cut where skin had given into force. The color of the line matched the line they had cut from the female. Blue polypropylene, nicked in places that told you someone had used it often. The Coast Guard pulled the remaining weights from the set. There was no permit number, there was no confession. There rarely is. The ocean collects what people refuse to own and hands it back in the only language it has: presence. Jonah read the report in the hallway outside the Harbormaster IS office because the smell of old paper lived there and made him feel like a version of himself he could still respect. The words on the page said nothing about what the town already knew. Someone was setting illegal gear too deep, too close, with no care for the mouths that read the water by pressure. People call it fishing when the money is needed and something else when it is not them. The sea does not use those words, it uses math. It calculates loss and writes it into currents. He began walking the beach again. He took a 5-gallon bucket and the habit of looking without assuming. He found rope ends with melted tips. He found plastic floats without numbers. He found a hook that made his thumb bleed even while he knew where it was. He turned it into the bin beside the ramp where a hand-painted sign said, "Gear here, not there." A gull watched him and did not care. The gull had its own economy. He slept the way the harbor slept when fog comes in close. Light, ready for the sound that will mean get up. He did not tell anyone that he woke some nights to the memory of a breath that was not human across the water. He did not tell anyone that he expected it, resented it, depended on it. The sea teaches you to wait. It rarely teaches you how to stop. Fog laid itself over the harbor one morning so thick that boats looked like rumors. The difference between stillness and silence is what your body expects. Jonah stepped into water up to the shin and let the cold climb until his mind narrowed to what was in front of him. The fog made the world small enough to hold. A ridge of water lifted without moving anywhere. Something surfaced beyond it with the exact slowness of intent. The dorsal appeared like a declaration and then the white of an eye patch. It hovered, precise, as if measuring the distance between two breaths. He did not move forward. He did not move back. He stood like a depth sounder that had just found bottom. Something nudged his leg with weight and shape. Rope, wet and heavy. Blue. The same line. Not a random scrap. A piece with fray at one end where it had been cut by something that did not care about leaving a clean edge. He picked it up without pretending it did not matter. The orca stayed. One exhale grew into the fog at head height and then fell like a curtain that the morning kept refusing to raise. She turned with deliberation and moved out of frame. No splash, no show, only the rectangle of absence where a body had been. By afternoon, the Coast Guard had coordinates and the first anchors out of water. An unmarked buoy had lived 30 feet down where the old channel cut curved. The set ran for miles, anchored to nothing you would want to claim under your true name. Weights, modified lines, a section of net that had been cut and knotted and cut again by hands that knew their business. They pulled what they could and marked what they could not. The harbor did not cheer. It exhaled in the small way towns exhale when a thing that should never have started gets paused without guarantee. The video of the rope dropping made it online the same day because nothing waits anymore. People argued over what it meant. Gratitude, proof, coincidence, myth. The footage was gray on gray, a man and a shape and a line becoming visible for a second. Meaning lived outside the pixels like weather that did not show on radar. Jonah did not read the comments. He walked back to the slip and counted the boards, and then counted them again as if numbers could be a spell against believing too much. NOAA sent 2 people with open faces and laptops that looked waterproof, and maybe were. They wanted to confirm identity, which is a tidy ambition when the subject does not carry a wallet. They played recorded calls, whistles, and pulsed tones cataloged in a world of files, sound as ID, memory as map. They sat in his shop among the smell of resin and old rope and rain, and the screen put waves into lines. A particular pattern repeated, a cascade, a pause, a flare of sound that matched both a 15-year-old recording from a rescue and a 30-day-old recording from the kelp beds. T47C, female, likely matriarch now, seen with juveniles and a subadult, known for complex hunt coordination and for revisiting specific shelves where currents wedge bait in ways schools do not anticipate until too late. The scientist spoke about long-term memory in toothed whales the way a person might speak about a library they have never finished reading. Caution, respect, no certainty, never certainty. Jonah kept his hands on the table where they could not do old work with tools that were not there. He listened and did not pretend this was magic. It was data. It felt like faith because most of the world had not caught up to it yet. The truth is rarely surprised by its own evidence. The illegal gear investigation developed the way investigations do when everyone knows everyone and nobody wants to wake a sleeping history that sank 2 marriages and a boat. The sheriff ate lunch at his desk and stopped telling jokes. The harbor master wore his hat lower. A few boats did not leave the slip at dawn. A few more left at night with no lights and came back when the moon had its back turned. Somebody painted over a number on a buoy with paint that does not cure on wet plastic. Bad decisions have smells. They travel. The harbor patrol added a new coat of paint to an old sign and moved it 6 inches closer to the ramp where nobody could miss it. 300 yards is respect. 300 yards is love. The line between witness and harassment does not drift as much when the reminder stands where your hand naturally reaches. Naomi from the lab came up on Saturdays and pointed to the water and taught anyone who would listen how to tell a seal from a log, a wave from a back, and a memory from a guess. Her voice settled into the boards. Some people changed what they did after that. Some people did not. The law sometimes needs help from shame. Shame sometimes needs help from weather. The sea gave them another chance to make something right in a way that looked like luck and felt like arithmetic. A storm rolled through with the kind of wind that makes people say names of boats out loud, as if those names are prayers. After, when the swell subsided into the sort of motion that looks like calm until you act as if it is, the lab picked up an old ping. A receiver buried under sand and excuses woke and spoke once like a cough. They hauled it with a groan and 3 straps and set it on a dock that had heard worse stories but not recently recorded ones. The hard drive spun. It told them what it had heard 15 years earlier, and 10 and 5 and last month when nobody asked it to listen. It held calls and clicks and the human background that never knows it is in the shot. Chain clatter. A boat name said too loud. A number spoken because it would not be remembered unless the mouth gave it shape. Evidence, alive enough to make the sheriff put his hat on the table and look at the wall like the wall needed to understand something it could not. None of this turned into a headline with a neat bow. It became a stack of small truths that, together, did not fall over when someone pushed with denial. Paperwork matters. So does a rope end with a particular fray. So does an old call that sounds like a voice teaching a calf how to breathe. The harbor did not applaud. It adjusted. Which is how places survive when spectacle has moved on. The Orca returned twice more that year without approaching the dock. She held to the edge of the kelp and passed like a sentence that people chose not to interrupt with interpretation. Jonah watched from the bluff and kept his hands in his pockets like someone who has learned not to reach for what he cannot keep. He worked. He did the small right things that rarely show. He taught a teenager how to coil line the way it wants to be coiled. He marked a kayak with reflective tape in places that matter at dusk. He wrote the tide windows on a scrap of cardboard and taped it to a post because not everyone can afford a phone that tells them what the sea already knows. He said nothing about whales unless saying something would prevent a mistake. When tourists asked where the rescue happened, he pointed to the whole inlet instead of a spot. It kept them off the rocks and away from the urge to touch the exact place where something larger than them once felt close. Humans like coordinates. Meaning does not. Meaning prefers patterns and distance and an honest witness. On the last calm day before winter entertained itself, he walked the beach in air that smelled like rain coming sooner than forecasts. He found 2 lengths of blue rope braided together like a bad decision. He cut them into pieces with a knife he carried for apples and old nylon and put those pieces into the bin where hands later sort what we meant to throw away. The sign above the bin had been repainted by someone with a steadier hand. Gear. Here. Not there. Thank you, whoever you are. At dusk, he stood at the end of the dock where the story had started for him, and for people who needed stories more than proof. The water held the sky's last pale like a kept secret. He did not expect to see her. He rarely expected anything that would feel like narrative justice. The sea does not honor our taste for plot. It honors physics and hunger and the politics of currents. The call came on a slate morning when the horizon looked like a crease. Another entanglement. Mid-channel, fast current. The line wrapped high and low. The female rolled just enough to keep the blowhole clear. The team knew better than to hurry. Hurrying is how you lose both the chance and the animal. The water took the heat out of muscles in seconds. The human body accepts cold the way pride accepts advice. Reluctantly and then not at all. Jonah moved with the patience of a person who finally understood he would not be forgiven for shortcuts. He worked under the pectoral where the rope had found purchase in a crease not designed for fiber. The knife slid and found almost enough and then not enough. He retreated and waited for the next rise and went again. All around them, the sea arranged itself as if none of this mattered. Kelp leaned and stood. Jellyfish pulsed. A harbor seal watched from a distance and calculated a boundary that let it observe without teaching a mistake it would regret. The team cut 2 wraps and gained a breathing space. The third held like a decision. The fourth revealed the knot that had taken thought to tie, and would take thought to unravel, a thought that was not human but had a logic tuned to wet force and leverage. It gave. The rope fell toward the bottom with relief that felt physical even from the boat. The female did not celebrate. She breathed and turned and swam 3 slow arcs that set the water right again. The team took stock. No injuries, no heroics. Only work done on the right day in the right way with people who had learned from days when they had not done it right. Fog holds sound low and keeps secrets high. The morning she brought the rope near the man at the dock, the world shortened to a few yards. He stood still and did not interpret. The rope bumped his shin. The fin cut the surface. The exhale rebuilt the air. Then she left. The moment took longer to explain than to live. From the cove mouth, a gull's eye view would have seen the geometry of approach and retreat. A straight line in, a pause in alignment with the human. A drop at the precise point where the current would deliver the object to his leg. Not a line that meandered, not a curve that would indicate play. A placement inside a moving system that used the system. That is not magic. That is competence applied to meaning. From the outer rocks, a fisherman who had come to watch without admitting it saw fog shift and felt the weight of a choice he had been postponing. The line in his shed matched the line in the water. His hand found his phone and did not raise it. The sea sometimes makes confession more efficient than courts. From the patrol boat idling beyond the kelp, an officer saw a protocol that had not been written. The officer reached for the radio and gave coordinates with the calm that tells a listener where to put their attention. Calm is contagious when it is real. Panic is contagious when it is not. From the perspective of the pod, the moment likely measured differently. A calf adjusted its path when the matriarch eased speed. A juvenile learned that a human can be part of a solution at a distance. Experience transmitted without ceremony. That is how knowledge travels when you cannot afford vows. After the storm that bent the pine at the head of the dock and took 3 shingles off the cannery roof, the old receiver woke. It had slept under sand and barnacle and silt. The storm's scouring hands found it and shook the memory loose. The device came up scarred but still willing. The hard drive spun and gave. The sounds it held did not change the world. They preserved it. Coals rose on the screen in lines that the technician's face translated into relief. The pattern matched. The female's signature carried through years like handwriting on damp paper that somehow never smudged. Under the calls, under the clicks, human life knocked. Chain on rail. A boat name tossed in impatience. A list of numbers said because memory fails and people do not trust their own hands to write when the deck shifts. The sheriff wrote without moving his head. He wrote the parts that courts require and the parts that communities need in order to see themselves clearly. He wrote until the pen ran out, and then he reached for the next one and did not break the rhythm. A charter left with a stern line dragging. The sea is generous with warnings the way a teacher is generous with a raised eyebrow. The line spun into the prop and made the boat choose a vector toward the jetty. The call went out. The patrol boat turned like a thought finally acted on. The volunteer RIB slid off the trailer with a common grace that rarely earns headlines. The fix was not complicated. It needed clarity and cooperation and the absence of pride. The line came free with a cut that made sense because the person holding the knife had made opposite mistakes before and kept the scar as reference material. No one thanked the ocean. The ocean does not accept thanks. It accepts better behavior. The town gathered in the gym where the basketball lines had faded to the color of whispers. Folding chairs made everyone the same height. On the first night, people spoke as if speaking were proof. On the second, people listened. Charts at the front explained distances in yards and in heartbeats. A map showed where pods traveled, and how many calves had been seen, and how many did not make it through a season that used to be generous. The old captain in the corner stared at a single point on the floor, and blinked less often. He did not need the numbers. He needed the room to stop pretending it could not count. Rules became customs. Customs outlast laws. Distance ceased to be a punishment and became a practice. The rental shop adjusted their speech to include phrases like hold the line and idle early. The brewery hung a sign that said, "The whales do not drink here because jokes work where lectures fail." The high school science teacher printed tide tables on stickers and handed them out at the door so that phones would not be the only oracle in town. She passed by twice more in the months after the rope. No phones waited. The light was wrong for cameras anyway. Her fin drew a dark note across a score of water. The juvenile kept pace and learned the shape of a coastline the way a child learns the shape of a house with the light off. Jonah watched once from the bluff and once from the dock and placed his hands on the rail where the wood was worn smooth by weather and time. He did not hold breath that day. He did not feel the need. Breath comes easier when a place remembers how to act. He kept working. He changed the oil on an engine that had outlived its original boat by 2 owners. He epoxied a split in a paddle that belonged to a couple who kept smiling in wind that made most people scowl. He cut another section of blue line into lengths too short to catch anything. He stacked them like evidence inside a bin that had become a ledger as honest as any court. Small acts are how you pay debts that do not send invoices. The story shrank to the size it should have been all along. Not a miracle. A message. Not a legend. A ledger entry. A record of competence expressed at the exact right time to the only person who would not misread it. The rope became a sentence anyone could translate. Stop setting death. Start collecting harm. Remember what the sea told you once when you needed to be the kind of person who listens. Jonah stood again at the end of the dock when winter tested the edges of things. The tide moved its hand across the inlet and flattened every intention. He watched until the light left and the water carried away the last thin stripe of day. The sea did not lift a body for him that evening. It did not bring proof. It owed him nothing. It offered instruction. He took it. He went home. He slept. He woke before dawn because that is what people do when they choose work that matters more than performance. Distance is not distance when it is respect. It is closeness executed correctly. 300 yards is a promise to let intelligence work without interruption. Idle speed is a courtesy that animals register as safety. Reporting gear where gear does not belong is less a favor to the law and more a favor to the next breath an animal will take. Picking up blue rope is how you learn to read the sea's handwriting and answer in kind. If you come to this coast, bring patience. Leave appetite for spectacle at home. Watch for the black blade among the swells from a place that does not change the swim. Do not narrate with your presence. Let the water hold its own sentences. If the ocean ever hands you a message, do not decorate it. Deliver it. Then get out of the way. The orca did not remember a man because she needed him to be special. She remembered an act. She remembered a location. She remembered what pressure felt like when it lifted. She remembered the shape of help. 15 years later, she required that memory to do a new thing that protected the future of her own. That is not myth. That is history that happens to breathe. The harbor will keep counting. The receivers will keep listening. The children will grow up with a sign that reads like a vow instead of a warning. The sea will continue to tell the truth about us without ever speaking our names. If this story pulled you into a different pace, if it made you feel light turn on wet skin and made you choose distance over proof, subscribe and tap the bell. Like this video so it finds the people who still think the ocean exists for their clip. Share it with the friend who loves whales and the friend who needs rules. Then go outside and practice the only ritual that matters near wild things. Stand back. Let them pass. Remember what you saw. Act like you will be remembered for it. Late winter brings alder catkins that dust the air and a chill that tastes metallic. The harbor breathes slow. The pods are scarce. The sea looks like slate that has been wiped clean. This is when complacency grows. Jonah uses the lull to repair the small things that determine whether a boat forgives a mistake. He replaces a chafed hose. He shortens a line so it will not foul a prop. He adds reflective tape to a bow that disappears at dusk. These acts hold no drama. They hold safety. Spring leans in like an apology for what came before. The bait returns in shimmering blocks that move as one mind. Seals curve and calculate. Eagles draw lazy circles, then tighten into geometry that ends in sudden acceleration. A week of clear water brings visibility that makes even caution feel impatient. Rental kayaks multiply. The sign about distance looks decorative in good weather. It is not decorative. It is a choice written in paint. Summer glows. The long light reveals more than it hides. Boats travel in packs. The sound of outboards turns the cove into an argument. The pod stays outside the kelp and moves early and late. The matriarch favors the deep channel where current and shadow conspire to buy quiet. People call it elusive. It is not elusive. It is busy with survival. Autumn corrects summer. Swell runs like muscle. Wind writes its name on water and does not care if anyone reads it. The harbor remembers the last big storm and the last small one. Lines double on cleats. Eyes turn to the bar when the outside becomes 1,000 mirrors. The pod's route tightens. The juveniles hug the inside of the matriarch's ark. The town returns to listening. Experiments done far from this harbor showed that orcas recognize calls after long gaps. They respond to family structure through sound that functions like names and like maps. They teach hunting with patience that looks like rehearsal. They hold a model of space and time that allows them to predict where a prey animal will commit an error. None of this proves sentiment. All of it proves attention. Attention accumulates. An orca trained by experience ties breath to places the way a human ties memory to thresholds. The sandbar at Breaker's Inlet held one such threshold. The dock held another. A place becomes a sentence when an animal survives at that place by watching a pattern and repeating it when repetition is the safer choice. The rope offering did not require myth to be meaningful. It required a body with a long memory for pressure and for relief. A kayak stalled mid-channel when a bungee snapped and gear slid toward the stern. The paddler froze. A porpoise surfaced near the bow and then away, guiding eyes to a sandbar where a landing would be easy. The paddler followed the movement without calling it guidance. The paddler called it luck. Luck is often the name we give to attention we did not notice we were paying. A storm petrel hit a window on the boardwalk and lay stunned, chest heaving. A child crouched and saw that life can be very near and require only shade and time. The petrel rose later and flew clumsily over water that did not care about the drama. The child kept the moment like a marble in a pocket. A marble changes a walk by changing a step. A harbor seal tangled in kelp at low tide worked its body into slack water and freed itself without intervention. Onlookers cheered in a way that seals do not register. People need release to be noisy. Animals often require quiet to do the same work. The rental shop removed binoculars from tour boats to avoid the lure of closeness through a lens. They increased the zoom on the dockside scope and showed tourists how to read water without entering it. This lowered incidence more than any pamphlet. The brewery printed tide charts on coasters. A drunk man remembered a number the next morning and idled farther out. The memory likely saved a calf from a course line that would have been to hunt and cost energy that could have fed a body. The high school theater club painted a mural on the cannery wall that showed the pod as blocks of light among darker water. It was not realistic. It was respectful. It turned a flat surface into a reminder that the town exists within a larger shape. A clear morning arrived like a deliberate choice. The air had the taste that comes when wind has cleansed the coastline of smoke and of old heat. The pod came close to the inner shelf and lined in a way that suggested a plan. Boats kept their distance because habits had taken root. One calf pushed a seal against a wave face with precision that looked like choreography. The matriarch did not lead. She positioned. The hunt required no chase. It required placement and patience. The calf learned. People observed with the revised pleasure that comes when being a witness does not require participation. Jonah stood half a mile away and watched through a scope that made the ocean feel both close and honest. He felt none of the old hunger that had once driven him to the edge of the dock. He felt the quiet pride of a person who finally prefers small work to large gestures. The recognition that matters most is the one you extend toward the future version of yourself who will inherit your decisions. No anonymous confession landed in a mailbox. No one sent a message that named a buyer or a seller or a captain. The case built itself the way frost builds on a window, thin at first and then undeniable. The harbor adjusted. Some boats left for good. Some boats stayed and changed. The sea makes reform unattractive and then makes it unavoidable. Late in the year, when mornings taste like iron and lungs burn clean, the pod transited south. The female held to her line as if it were a ridge under the surface. The juvenile swam a hand's breadth closer to her than before. The bull lagged far out beyond the kelp, where the noise of men thins and the noise of water arranges itself into useful messages. The line they drew across the mouth of the harbor contained no appeal to anyone on shore. It explained nothing. It asked for nothing. It did not exist for human eyes. It existed because life must move through space in a way that honors energy and risk. Jonah watched from the bluff. He did not lift a hand. He did not consider a story about full circles. Circles suggest closure. The sea prefers spirals and routes. Routes repeat because repetition is a kind of wisdom. He let them pass as if passing were the ending the story had always deserved. A rope was lifted from water and cut into pieces. Illegal sets were documented and removed. A community recalibrated its tolerance for small crimes that cost large lives. A man kept showing up to do unremarkable work. An orca used a memory to point at a threat. None of these things call for applause. They call for maintenance. Maintenance is the opposite of neglect and more powerful than spectacle. It is the daily decision to prioritize outcomes over images. It lacks a hook and it lacks a twist. It holds the shape of a harbor in rough weather and the shape of an animal as breath in a place where it will not be interrupted. If you are waiting for a grand answer, you will not find it here. The proof you want is smaller and harder. It lives in the texture of choices, in distances held, in engines idled, in rope cut before it drifts, in the way a town stops needing to be reminded because the reminder has turned into a reflex. An orca recognized conditions and a location and a human who would act. A human recognized a pattern and a task and a responsibility. This is what recognition looks like across species. It is not romance. It is the refusal to be careless. Carry that refusal. Practice it. Keep your body where it belongs when wild lives are working. Make your videos from shore. Learn the water. Understand that a gift from the ocean is never free. It asks you to hold a line you cannot see and honor a boundary you cannot measure with your hands. When you are tempted to test the edge, remember the rope that bumped a leg on a fogged-in morning and changed the habits of a town. Remember the juvenile that washed into the inlet and became a ledger entry that nobody wanted. Remember that myths are easier than maintenance and less useful. If this long story has held you, let it adjust your pace. Let it slow the part of you that reaches for a better angle when the best angle is distance. Subscribe and like if you want more of this kind of witness, where the hook is earned and the ending is a choice. Bring this caution with you the next time you meet the ocean. Bring it even when you stay 300 yards back, especially then.